There are some games from the late 90s and the early 2000s that I think have aged remarkably well. Then there are some games that make you wonder how they became so popular in the first place. Turok Dinosaur Hunter is the second kind of game. Turok is an FPS released in March of 1997 for the N64. It was originally developed by Iguana Entertainment, an in-house studio of publisher Acclaim Entertainment. It got a remastered port in 2015, so I bought it for the nostalgia. I sat on it forever, content with my memories of Turok and the knowledge I could play it. But then I had to go and boot it because I wanted to share it with the world. For historical context, Turok was the first shooter to be released on the N64 and the 12th game released on the console in North America. Turok managed to release a month before Doom 64, possibly stealing all potential thunder that game had on release, because Doom had been ported to nearly everything at that point. It also didn't help that most people thought Doom 64 was just another port and not a new game. This contrasted with Turok and its cutting-edge, for the time, 3D graphics. Turok stole the show and went on to postpone the inevitable financial ruin of Acclaim Entertainment. Watch this zero punctuation video for a concise overview of their existence. My only comment is the fact that Creed is the last game published by Acclaim before it went out of business. Turok, however, was the game that was going to save the day. Visually, it looks impressive for something that was designed to fit on an 8MB ROM cartridge and run on an N64 console. If anybody thought the Xbox 360 was mildly primitive, then get ready for today's hardware lesson that no one asked for. The N64 is a marvel of technology by today's standards. The main CPU was a 64-bit single-core processor running at 93.75 MHz. Just want to point out how modern-day CPUs typically run between 2 to 4 GHz per core. It has a supplemental 64-bit reality coprocessor that acted as the GPU and clocked in at about 62.5 MHz. I know it's really not important, but I want to point out how dumb a name the reality coprocessor is before moving on. The N64 had a whopping 4 MB of RAM that could be expanded to 8 MB with the expansion pack, sold separately. A common trait of many N64 games is the highly compressed textures and sounds. This was due to technical limitations related to the game cartridges Nintendo used for the N64. They were ROM cartridges that had a maximum storage size of 64 MB. By comparison, the CDs being used in the original PlayStation at the time had 650 MB of storage. The N64 used two types of video connectors that many of you have never seen and would typically output at 3020 by 2040p. I say typically because some games could run at 6040 by 480, but that usually required the extra 4 MB of RAM to function. There's always more to talk about, but this lecture is over. Class dismissed. Back to talking about the visuals of Turok. By 90s standards, it was cutting-edge visual fidelity. Nowadays, the aesthetic is nostalgic. I can appreciate the low poly models and the low-res textures. I think the environmental design is well done for the time, even if I'm not totally sold that this is a land outside of time. But what I can't appreciate is the poor draw distance. The whole world beyond 50 feet is pretty much covered in fog at all times. This was, and still is, a fairly standard trick to compensate for the lack of computing power to display a seamless 3D environment. Most people will recognize its use from something ubiquitous like Minecraft. My personal favorite example is the Spider-Man N64 game where they explain the draw distance fog as a part of the game's narrative. Doc Ock is up to some crazy shit in that game. Interestingly, Turok has real-time lighting effects and the human animations were all motion capture work. That's perhaps why they look so fluid but wonky. I'm personally a fan of a couple of the enemy designs, but my overall favorite is the tie between the Mecharaptor and the Tricera tank. Can't say I'm a big fan of our titular character's design though. It's not good. Before leaving visuals, I do want to give Night Dive props on this remaster. There are many subtle changes to the visuals compared to the original. I think it's at least a bit more colorful and visually appealing when compared to the original release. The sound of Turok is that classically compressed quality of the N64 vintage. The sound effects in general are a mixed bag for me. What's interesting about the version of Turok that I'm playing is the music. There's an option to change it between the compressed N64 tracks or the crisper, albeit slightly wonkier PC tracks. I personally think that the N64 tracks by Darren Mitchell are better, but the fact that you're given an option is appreciated. The few bits of voice acting in Turok are fine, even if most of them are different yells or grunts. While Turok is a 90s boomer shooter, it's also one giant key hunt. You traveled to different levels from a central hub of portals at the end of the first level. These portals are unlocked by keys found in each level. The keys to successive levels are hidden within each playable level. Each level can have between 2 and 4 keys hidden within. And what's really screwy is the fact that in level 2, you'll be finding keys to level 3 and 4. You might end up in a situation where you have to travel back a few levels to search for a key to progress. Turok uses a live system to throw some extra difficulty into the mix. Lives are subtracted on death, and you'll respawn at the last checkpoint or save location. Lives can be regained by collecting 100 of these Triforce pieces. Interestingly, lives cap out at 9, and when you max out, you unlock the infinite life cheat. Prevent an untimely demise by making sure your health doesn't go below 0. Health and health pickups work really weird in Turok. Pickups range from 2 health to 25 health to a full heal. You can overheal up to 200, but only the 2 health pickups can be used to do that. Except for if you find the ultra health pickup, which will just give you 100 health. Pretty bonkers. There's also tech armor that can be found. This will take damage in place of your health, and it seems to absorb more than just 25 points of damage, but maybe that's just me. Additionally, a backpack pickup will double the amount of ammo you can carry. It's incredibly useful because otherwise you will be constantly switching between weapons in search of one with ammo. I'm a fan of a few of the weapons on hand. The knife is there as a permanent backup. I use it like twice and never again because it does almost no damage. The tech bow shoots these exploding arrows that are very useful against tougher enemies in the early game. The pistol is good for killing low tier enemies. Otherwise, it's a waste of ammo to use. The pump action shotgun does a ton of damage, and with incendiary shells, it's like a goddamn sniper. The auto shotgun takes that to a whole new level. The assault rifle fires in a 3-round burst, and that ended up being a mainstay in my arsenal. The pulse rifle does surprisingly little damage, and I didn't really use it as much as I would have liked, which is a shame because I think the design looks sick. The minigun is the first of the heavier weapons available. Not much to say about it. It spits lead at problems. The alien weapon makes up for its lack of naming creativity with great functionality. It fires a delayed AoE blast that has some wonky physics. Blasts will move enemies if they are close to the center. The particle accelerator kinda sucks. It freezes enemies and causes them to explode, which is cool, but it takes a long time to charge and fire, which is not. The grenade launcher looks rad as hell, and the grenades surprisingly appear to have physics, if not clever scripting. I used it less often than I expected, honestly. I would often forget about it in my playthrough because other weapons didn't hurt me with splash damage in some of the tighter areas. Turok has a quad rocket launcher. To quote the game's manual, need we say more? The fusion cannon is this game's version of a nuke. They're incredibly rare, with me finding a total of 2 in the entire game. It shoots these red balls that create massive explosions that annihilate anything nearby. It's pretty rad, but I wish I would have gotten to use it more. There's also a secret weapon known as the Chronoscepter. You won't be seeing it in this playthrough because it's split into 8 hidden pieces across the levels, and I don't have enough patience to do that right now. The manual says you need it to beat the final boss, but that's a lie. Here's me doing it without it. To provide some variety, there are a lot of different enemies to fight. Big Bad Evil Guy, the Campaigner, has called upon everyone in the Lost Lands to invade Earth. Unfortunately, there are a lot of reskins of a couple functional roles. Humanoids boil down to if they're using melee or a gun to attack me. Honorable mention to the Conjurers who start appearing mid-game. While they provide variety, the Magic Men are fucking annoying to deal with. The prehistoric creatures mostly try to melee you. I hate those dragonflies. But I do love the biomechanical upgrades the dinosaurs get in later levels. The alien infantry are oddballs when compared to everybody else. They visually look like they belong in a different game, though they aren't afraid to blast you with their dual plasma weapons. The alien infantry are also surprisingly mobile with the ability to rocket jump around the map. To top it off, they will also sometimes self-destruct while dying. There are also giant mechs that begin to replace the weaker green trolls who populate earlier levels. Fuck the crawlers. Overall, I would have preferred fewer enemy skins for more variety in my enemies. The bosses are all proper meat sponges. It was the style of the time. Here's a spoiler warning because I want to talk about the bosses. Skip here to avoid spoilers. Okay, so the first boss is ridiculous in the best kind of way. Long Hunter sends Humvees to mow you down before taking matters into his own hands. The second boss is just a big dumb praying mantis. Just walk backwards around the arena and you'll kill him good. Thunder is my favorite boss. It's a cybernetic T-Rex. He even comes with a giant laser beam. How is anything else supposed to compete with that? The campaigner is the final boss, and he has an interesting pattern. But in the end, he was easier to kill than Thunder. Overall, some pretty good bosses, marred by one particular bug. One last near critical part of gameplay I need to mention is the game map. You will probably get lost wandering through similar looking environments or wondering where you haven't searched. Press tab to pull it up. It's a bit primitive, but it does the job. Okay, now that I've gone through most of how the game works, you may be asking, how does it play? Not great if I'm being honest. I think Turok is one of those early first-person shooters that just didn't quite understand what made them appealing. For me, Turok's central problem is its pacing. This is due in part to a piece of gameplay I have refused to talk about until now. The excessive amount of platforming. It is at every single level, and all the secret challenges revolve around platforming as well. Your character movement is rather fast, so naturally the player is going to want to speed around through the levels, circle strafing things. This is the core to every boomer shooter ever. But that sense of speed is halted when you come across a series of jumps over an abyss. Once over, you're speeding along again until the next platforming challenge. It creates a very stop-and-go feeling that ultimately isn't very satisfying to play. Admittedly, you can just rush through the platforming, but the risk of falling and being sent back to the last checkpoint outweighs the reward for me. This particular lava jump made me load a save because I was convinced that something was bugged. It was my greatest wall when it came to platforming. I died a few times before I managed to land the jump. Personally, I think that's a sign of bad game design. But I also think that's a bit unfair. This was lead designer David Diestenbuur's first time designing a game. Well, outside of additional design done for the Batman Forever game. But it also means that I know exactly who to blame for all this motherfucking platforming, David! The pacing isn't helped by level lengths either. They start fairly short, but grow progressively longer and longer as time goes on. There are only 8 in total, but the last level took me over an hour to complete. Honestly, if not for the platforming, I feel like I would have enjoyed my time with Turok. Instead, it was a rather dull experience, which is worse than if this was a bad game. Because I can see potential here, it's just 30 jumps across platforms in the sky away. I have 2 additional gripes with Turok. The first is mostly the fault of my own memory. I remember there being way more dinosaurs in this game. I want more dinosaurs. The second is respawning enemies. This is a really annoying mechanic, and it's very prevalent throughout the game. Areas that I think are clear suddenly have enemies back in them again, and it's just always annoying to come across. The story is mostly window dressing for the gameplay. It serves more as an explanation for why you're there than an actual proper story. The only important thing you need to know about this game is the fact that this Turok is known as Talset, and he is the first to take up the mantle of Turok. Yes, Turok is both a name and a job title. It's hereditary too. If you want the in-depth story, I suggest taking a look at the Mountain of Turok comics, or just the ones made by Acclaim. All you need to know is that the Conqueror is Batman and must be stopped. Overall, my memory has failed me once again. Turok hasn't really held up all that well in gameplay. I would argue that the visual aesthetic has held up much better. There are a ton of N64/PS1 style games out there now, and I personally love that aesthetic. But I don't see many games that are just giant key hunts with mandatory platforming anymore. The times where I could run around and shoot things were legitimately a blast. But the platforming is such an annoyance that it taints pretty much every aspect of Turok for me. Maybe the later games have some more redeeming features, but I no longer trust my memories about Turok. You can find Turok on Steam or GOG, whichever is your preference. It's 20 bucks at full price and about half that when it usually goes on sale. My personal recommendation is to buy it for a nostalgia trip, but to wait for that sale. This might not be the last time I talk about Turok, but I have other ideas on the mind at the moment. Thanks for watching. Hey there! This is normally the part of the video where I stop talking and let you read the credits and jam out to tunes. But I actually want to break the fourth wall for a second. This video took me longer than I was planning, and I'd already expected it to take over a month. These videos take time, and the time I have to make them is limited by the need to make money to pay rent. So look, it's not you, it's me. This video was originally supposed to come out at the end of February, but I was delayed and might have gotten a little, distracted in the time since. The next video won't take as long, but it will probably take at least another month or so. Next one's gonna be a good one. It's a part of gaming history that I think a lot of people have passed on over the years for its more complex siblings. Thanks again.